The nature of what Chad does, I think, is really special. This is why we asked him to come on and speak. When I was going through the college admission process, I wish that I had known a guy like Chad. And Chad has some deep experience, which you're going to learn soon. Um, but gosh, I didn't know the difference between a college and a university. I didn't know really what I was looking for when I got started in college, in the college search process. So I think this is really valuable for kids who are in high school thinking about where they want to go, parents of kids in high school who would like to help guide their children or even grandchildren into a great college or a university at some point. So really, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Chad, Chad Van Soest. Chad, how long have you been involved with the college admissions process?
Thank you, Pete and Kyle. Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate it. I've been involved, and it's actually going to be on my screen here. I'll go ahead and share that.
Sounds great.
I've been doing this for 18 or so years. You guys can see that.
Wow. Yes.
And yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about my background. I started in college admissions, and so I started, like a number of folks at admissions do. They really enjoy their experience at the undergrad, and then they work for the office there while they get the admissions office while they get their master's degree, and that's exactly what I did, and it was great. So I did a few years of that, reading college applications, reading essays, reading recommendation letters, interviewing every student actually for that school, private liberal arts college in California. So that I did that for a few years, and then that ultimately with the master's led me out here. I'd always wanted to move to Colorado. Grew up coming out here to see my grandparents and whatnot, and so I'd heard of this school called Valor Christian that was kind of up and coming. It launched in 2007. I finished my program in 2010, and so I moved out here for that and spent 10 years at Valor on the other side of the desk, helping students get in. So you combine about 14 years, 15 years of that, and then I launched this business in 2021. My wife and I moved out to Florida for a job out there for her, and I thought, what greater opportunity than to take this time to start this. So I did. It's been great, and then we've ultimately, long story short, we're back in Colorado now. But in between Florida and Colorado, we had the opportunity to travel the country in a little camper with, a lot of people think we're crazy, but with four pets. And so never a boring moment there on that trip. And I saw 160 colleges on that tour, coast to coast. And that's something I'd always wanted to do. I never really met anyone else who's done that. And in this business, it's really important to get on the campuses and just get familiar with the vibe and obviously the knowledge of what's going on, keeping up with changes of the schools, those kinds of things. And then that helps me in turn recommend schools for students to apply to, help them build that college list, which is part of what I do. So that was an incredible experience back in 2022, 2023. And I continue to visit schools, of course, not to that level, but I am actually about to go on a trip to Tennessee this weekend through Wednesday to see some schools out there. And so I'm looking forward to that, because as much as I like the area, I've actually not actually toured any schools there. But you'll see on there, it says mountains, weather, and nature. That's kind of me in a nutshell. I love all things mountains, all things weather. And so I got a little bit of that theme there in the business of even the name Apex College Services. Of course, Apex can have a lot of different kind of meanings, but I like the mountain to kind of signify that. So I would like to talk today just, I think a lot of parents these days, especially with their oldest child, if they haven't gone through the process, they're a bit intimidated by just the landscape out there. with college, and just they know it's a lot different than when they applied. They know it's gotten more complicated. They know colleges are a lot more selective in universities. And so I feel like um, today, this presentation hopefully can help do a little bit of educating, maybe some things you already know, but maybe some things you don't, and help get a good handle kind of on the landscape and just some things that you want to know going in. If you've got a student, maybe they're in high school already, and you know it's on the horizon there. There's some good things to know here before you start to visit those schools and whatnot. That's basically what I'm gonna cover here, and then afterwards, we'll have time if anyone has any questions. So I thought it'd be good to start with this statistic here. Of course, as of 2021, so it's a little bit dated, but there were about 3,900 degree granting institutions in the United States. It's a pretty big number, United States alone. And about 2,600 of those were four-year universities. So it's not like half of them are necessarily community colleges. So our students, of course, some will look at community colleges, but a lot of our students want to look at four-year options, and there's 2,600 of them out there. I wonder how many of us can name even 50, And so that's part of the point of this presentation, is to kind of open our eyes as well to the fact that there are a lot of options. And sometimes we get kind of pigeonholed in our thinking, and kind of have a tunnel vision on where we want to look. But once you get out there, you start to see that, and you start to see there could be some really fantastic options that maybe you've never heard of, as well. So in Colorado alone, there's 80, 29 of those public, 18 private, and 40 are for profit, private. So pretty big number even in Colorado alone. So the first part I want to talk about here is is to distinguish what is a college versus a university. What is public versus private? I mean, it sounds pretty obvious, but what are some of those nuances? And then nonprofit and for-profit, to kind of talk through that. I think it's really, really important to do that. Starting with a college. Now, before I get into this, I want to point out the fact that it's not always easy black and white lines in determining the difference with some of these, because there are a lot of colleges these days that, in order to be competitive, especially, they offer things that universities offer as well. So when I'm talking about a college here, I'm defining it in its most pure and historical sense, but know that there are colleges that kind of resemble universities in some ways, and a classic example of that is traditionally a college really want to offer a business degree. Now most colleges do, because they know that that's one of the most sought after majors out there. But that's one example. Then you have some universities that kind of look like colleges as well. So that's the caveat. But when we're talking about a college, the first thing that really comes to mind is that it's smaller. And that's vastly the case, that you're going to have a smaller environment. So students seek out colleges often for that very reason alone. They understand the benefits of being in a smaller setting. It translates to a good classroom experience, smaller classes, actually getting to know your professors better, those types of opportunities. And a higher percentage of the degrees you get there are academic, and less of them are professional, aka your business degree. Of course, there are exceptions to that, as I just talked about. But you're going to have your traditional liberal arts degrees, literature, history, things like that, when you're talking about a traditional idea of what a college is. You typically have less options and less areas of study, so not as many majors offered. You might look at a school and go to their website and look at their majors, and it might be a list of 60 or 70 majors and minors, whereas the university might have hundreds. And so you're not going to have quite as many options usually. And because of the size of the college, you'll have probably less clubs and less organizations and things like that, maybe less sports. But the benefit is you get such a strong experience in teaching, and you have professors there who want to teach, and they want to be in a classroom. They want to get to know their students and really focus on that teaching, because not all faculty necessarily want to teach, right? I mean, they're in it for research and things like that. And they see teaching as sometimes something they have to do. But at a college, usually they are there to teach, and so that's an important thing to keep in mind. Traditionally, colleges don't have graduate schools either, and of course, there's a lot of exceptions to that. But a liberal arts college, and some of them still are this. They still operate in this manner. They don't have any graduate degrees, and the benefit to that is that you're not competing for professors and faculty's resources and time. You don't have faculty working with offering grad students some research opportunity before they would offer it to the undergrad. So you're not competing with the graduate school level there, which is nice. And then you'll have colleges that focus on a theme. There are classical liberal arts colleges where they study the classics. Or the great books. You've got colleges that have block systems, which I'll get into a little bit later on, but that's a unique type of semester system. And then, of course, you have your religiously themed colleges. And so you'll have, a greater proportion or number of students there, all for kind of that same reason with the theme of that college. And I talked about the classroom setting, definitely a great benefit. A university is quite the opposite in a lot of ways. They're mostly large. So I think a lot of us know that. And it's composed of schools or colleges inside the university, the College of Business, the College of Engineering, and so forth. And they do offer professional degrees. So both the size and the offering of professional degrees like engineering, accounting, things like that, that was historically one of the biggest differences between a distinguishing university and a college. And so those two things aside, you've got with the size, they're broader in scope and what they offer. They offer a lot more majors and minors. They have a lot of pre-professional programs like pre-pharmacy, pre-med, pre-dental. And let me just say, colleges now have those as well. But universities will have, every time we'll have the pre-professional programs. And then, of course, it's not unheard of to hear a large university offering 600, 700, 800 student-led clubs in any category you could think of, in the way you want to get involved. When I toured the country visiting schools, I swear, I think every college and university brought up the Taylor Swift fan club. And I think it was at that moment that I realized really how big of a deal she was, because I knew she was a big deal before that, but that's what really set it in stone for me. There's a priority in research with the university. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of faculty are there to lead groundbreaking research, in part funded by the government, to obviously discover things in science and psychology and so forth to make our society better. And so students can participate in that and have lots of opportunities for that. And so that's another distinction would be priority in research. Again, colleges will offer it too, but maybe to a lesser degree. And then your graduate programs. In order to be a university, you have to have graduate programs. That's one of the criteria. And so you'll have a portion of that. DU is a great example where I think they have more grad students than undergrads. So it's a huge part of what University of Denver is all about. The student to faculty ratio, because of the size, is going to be larger. So it's a little tougher, especially your first couple of years, to have access to the professor and to actually get to know them. And so when I'm talking to students and families, if there's a kid that they really, really, even from day one, want to know their teacher and they're better suited for that kind of a learning environment, I think a college or a small university is really the way to go. And so you have that large classroom setting, you have the large lecture halls and that sort of thing in a university. I mentioned the exceptions to the rules and the blurring a little bit there. And a couple examples here would be Dartmouth College. They call themselves a college still. But if you were to kind of look at all the definitions and really put a microscope over Dartmouth, they're a university. But I think they just didn't want to change their name. When they were founded, they were a college and they didn't want to change their name. Boston College, same thing. I think it's more for kind of historical and heritage reasons to keep college in their name. But by definition, those two are universities. And then two other examples of the opposite. If you guys have heard of them, Washington and Lee in Virginia there, fantastic college they call themselves university, but I think of them as more of a college in a lot of the ways we just discussed. And Colgate University. Those are both fantastic schools, around anywhere around 2,000 to 3,000 students. And with a few exceptions aside, they kind of resemble colleges more than universities. So just because you're going to go visit some schools and you'll see some have university at the end of their name and some have college at the end of their name, doesn't mean they're going to match all the criteria that I just went through. So that's just a caveat there. A little bit about briefly here about nonprofit and profit. When we think of a nonprofit college or university, that's typically, we're thinking of the traditional schools that we all know of. Their funding comes from tuition, donors, as well as state and federal government. And their whole business model is different. It really the funding goes towards the educational experience. You're not trying to please shareholders or anything like that in terms of profitability. It's about first and foremost the education. And normally they'll have your 18 to 22-year-old traditional college age, traditional college experience. Of course, a lot of people perhaps used to associate online learning with kind of for-profit, but that's not necessarily the case. There is, of course, a lot of online learning opportunities with nonprofit as well. For-profit funding only comes from tuition dollars, and it goes into the the stakeholders are going to have a lot of say in kind of what's done there, and the tuition is used also for marketing. So there's kind of a whole different blueprint for how they operate. You will have some schools that have traditional aged college students, but I think most of us, when we think of a for-profit university or tech school, it's oftentimes adult learners. Maybe they want to change a career, something like that. And it could be like there could be a specialty there, like ITT tech. So oftentimes they're technical schools, schools of that nature, something that's maybe cutting edge in technology. And you're not normally going to have that general ed curriculum at for-profit schools. One exception to that rule for a time was Grand Canyon University, which a lot of us might have heard of. They did have traditional age students. They had a large campus life, all that stuff. I believe they are now transferring over or have already converted over to a nonprofit entity. But for a long time, Grand Canyon University was that for-profit example that was a little different. We then have the public and private. And so again, to go through this, hopefully not telling us things we already know, but for a public college or university, and there are public colleges, there's smaller ones, a lot of different states. The government obviously funds the school in addition to tuition. Because the public university or college is tied to the state, there's less autonomy there. So you're not going to have a religious public university. The state and it calls a lot of the shots and has a lot of control. And we're actually seeing that play out if we watch the news in Florida and places like that, the influence that the state government has on the universities and what they do. So there is less autonomy there. They are typically universities, but there are some colleges, and they're going to be less expensive because of the subsidizing that happens there, especially for in-state students. Though now they bring it up, in case you guys don't know, there are reciprocity agreements sometimes, and we happen to be in a region where we could take advantage of that. So if you have a kid in Colorado and they want to go to most of the universities out west in almost any Western state, they could qualify for a tuition break. And now it's normally, if you're not going to see like UCLA on there, it's going to be there is, I think, University of Utah's on there, and I think Arizona State, and a lot of branch schools and things like that. But it could be a great opportunity to look into if you want to pay not out of state tuition, but in state and a half is really what it would be. So it's a bit of a break there. So that's something I thought I would just throw out there. So because of the schools being subsidized, there's often less scholarships. You're not typically going to see a large merit scholarship from a state school. Though you can, it's just not as often. Some states really are prioritizing recruiting from out of state, and oftentimes that's related to, does the state want to grow? Are they losing populations, and so they want to incentivize students to come, because if the student comes to their state institution, research institution, hopefully they'll make a career and stay there. University of Missouri was a good example of this, and there's plenty of other ones where they had a lot of incentives to get students to University of Missouri and give you tuition breaks and help grant you in-state tuition. So basically help grant you that residency. So that can go on depending on what state we're talking about. But normally, yeah, you're going to see less incentives and tuition breaks if you're coming from out of state. Private funding comes from not the government necessarily. It does play into grants and things like that. So it goes directly to the students. But funding mainly comes from donors and tuition, which of course makes tuition a lot more expensive for a private school. I will say that the average graduation time at a private college or university is normally less than a state university, though. So if you look at the big picture, you're more likely to get out in 4 years at a private college or university than you are a public state school. So depending on the situation, you could maybe save money in the end. And because they're lacking some of the help from the government, whatnot, private universities and colleges are known to offer bigger scholarships, sometimes full tuition in to dozens of students. So if you have a student who is a great test taker, has done very well in high school, you could get a lot more money from a private school and therefore have even a probably more affordable experience than you could at a public school in a lot of cases. So for the right student, private could be the way to go when it comes to finances. So naturally, more autonomy. They can make their own decisions, and they can have their own campus life and theme and the kind of setting that they really want to create, aka a religious, lots of religious colleges out there, and private religious universities. Higher total cost, as I mentioned. The thing I haven't touched on yet here with this slide is not that state public universities don't have a strong campus life, because plenty of them do, of course, but that's something that private schools really try and do and go take an extra effort to create a really good campus experience. Oftentimes offering, especially if they're smaller, guaranteeing 4 years to be able to live on campus if you want to. That's unheard of at a larger university. You get kicked off after year one usually. So to be able to live on campus all 4 years is huge. And then to offer a great bridge programs for incoming freshmen to get freshmen prepared and all kinds of things that they do, traditions, all of that. So you're gonna get a good focus on campus life. I'm going to go through here a number of what I call difference makers. When you're out there and you're shopping for colleges and universities, you're visiting schools, some things to kind of be on the lookout for that I feel are worthy to look into. The first one is, and I've referenced this earlier, I've referenced the block system. So the very first one would be, what is the nature of the calendar, the school calendar? We typically think of semesters, and that's probably a majority of what's out there. You're talking 16-week semesters with that nice big winter break in the middle, and you're going to get that at most. I guess if I had to put a number on it, maybe 70% of the schools that are out there, 75. You then have the quarter system. So don't overlook this. If you have a student who wants to look at California schools, for example, most of those are quarter, the public ones. Be aware of what you're getting into if you're getting into a quarter system school. You're talking 10-week semester, so it flies by. And that could be a good thing if you're in a class that's maybe not enjoyable. That could be a bad thing if it's a really difficult subject because it just goes by faster. So you got 10-week semesters, you have a shorter winter break, and then you've got your winter and your spring quarters there. And you do take less classes at a time, you 3 or 4 versus 5 or 6 as doing a semester, because the fact that it's going so fast. One advantage to a quarter system is if you think you might want to make a change, like change your major, for example, you don't have to wait for a whole long 16-week process to be over before you can kind of start anew, right? With your new classes you're going to need. It's 10 weeks and it's done. 10 weeks and it's done. So you have that ability and freedom to kind of make some of those changes in quicker fashion. But if you're looking to go heavy science major and maybe you struggle with a fast-paced environment, a quarter system might not be the best choice for you. And then one of my favorites, which is very uncommon, very rare, but I think maybe worth looking into for the right student, is the block system. And the 5 of us might know of the block system here because we're not far away from a school that has it, and that's Colorado College down in Colorado Springs. There's only a handful of schools in the country that offer the block system, but it's basically one class at a time, 3 weeks, 2 to 3 weeks a class. And so that, I mean, I think that would have been pretty appealing to me, honestly, if I go back in time, to be able to just focus on that one subject for 3 weeks and then go on to the next. Because some of us do struggle with the navigating and balancing all the different subjects and demands of our professors. So block system allows you to do that, and it also allows more travel. Some classes will just spend 3 weeks at the Grand Canyon or in Europe, and that'll be your class, and then you come home. So you're not studying abroad for a whole semester or anything like that. So I do think it's kind of neat. Another notable block school is Cornell College, not to be mistaken with Cornell University, which is the Ivy. Cornell College is in Iowa, great school. And it's not as selective as Colorado College, and it's a block system school. We then have the curriculum. So when you're looking at various schools, it's good to know what you're getting into. It's good to ask that question: what is required in a general education curriculum? What am I going to take? A notable example would be some schools are a lot more heavy on the language requirement than others, foreign language. And I know that not all of us like foreign language. Some of us want to be done after high school. And so it's good to ask questions like that. What is your general ed requirement? And that general ed requirement might even change based on your major. So if you're an engineering major, you might not have to take foreign language because they know you have so many other classes that you've got to kind of cram in there. So knowing what the curriculum is good. Knowing what liberal arts means is a good thing. And I've probably already referenced liberal arts a few times here. But there's a bit of a disagreement right now out there in terms of whether or not liberal arts is a good thing or kind of a wasted thing. And I happen to think it's still a good thing. And there's a reason why most universities are still going to have a general ed liberal artsy kind of requirement, because they do see value in taking a lot of different classes and being well-rounded. And regardless of what your major is, you're going to know a little bit about history and a little bit about art, and you can sit at the big boy table and have these great discussions and not just be an expert on your one major, but to know lots of other things. That's the whole point of liberal arts. And so there are still lots of liberal arts colleges and universities out there that really hone in on that. And a lot of them don't let you declare your major until your end of your sophomore year, because they want you to be able to sample everything that's out there. And liberal arts colleges, it's not uncommon for them to encourage double majors, triple majors even, and they make the pathway for that. So you do get a lot of freedom in kind of your educational track when you pursue a liberal arts option. You then have technical schools and technical options. Colorado School of Mines, Texas Tech, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech. And so with a tech school, for example, you still even there have somewhat of a general ed curriculum, but it is a lot less. I think School of Mines, if I recall, they might require 2, maybe 3 classes that we would think of as maybe the humanities. And even those I think are tied a little bit more into technology. And so if you're a student or you have a student who they want to go into engineering, don't want to ever deal again with learning about history, maybe they should look at a Colorado School of Mines or a school like that, and pursue those. The number of us on here may or may not have heard of a co-op. But a co-op is something that is also a little bit more rare. You see it more with engineering majors, but you don't really see it school wide. And that is literally a full-time internship for 6 months or more. And there are some universities out there who specialize in offering co-ops to every student. The one we might have all heard of is Northeastern University in Boston, and they kind of built the blueprint for this. And so if you're someone or you have a student who just doesn't want to wait and they really want to get in there and see what it's like to work full time, a Northeastern could be a good option, or a Drexel University, or a University of Cincinnati, or a Rochester Institute of Technology. That's the other one I'm thinking of. It might be University of Rochester, one of the Rochesters. They all specialize in really encouraging co-ops and making those connections with a large number of businesses, getting students full time in those careers for 6 months, and you're still enrolled in the college. So the drawback is that you're not going to graduate in 4 years, because you do need to take a minimum of at least 6 months there. But the benefit is you're not just working 10 hours a week at a part-time internship. You're really all in. And studies have shown co-ops lead to full-time jobs at a better rate, from my understanding, than internships do. So that's what a co-op is, cooperative education. If you're looking for it in something other than engineering, it's going to need to be one of those schools. Otherwise, a lot of other schools offer it in the engineering field. 3+2 and 4+1s are examples of combined degrees, or an expedited degree. So you can have a school offer you a 3+2 where you can spend 3 years getting your liberal arts degree at a liberal arts college, but then you also know you want to major in engineering or in something STEM related that college doesn't offer. And so they have a deal created with another institution that does offer engineering. So you end up getting degrees from both of those schools, and you finish off in engineering. So that is for the person who does recognize the value of a smaller setting, perhaps a liberal arts setting, but then they also want to get that big degree that's only offered at the bigger places. That's what the 3+2 is. A lot of schools partner with WashU for the engineering portion of that. And then a 4+1 or a 4+2, usually you see 4+1s. Those are where you spend your senior year in your undergrad, already working towards your master's degree. And a common one would be an MBA, where you're getting that from not day one, but early on in your undergrad process. You apply and you get granted this option to, in a 5-year period, get your undergraduate and your graduate degree at that same institution. So that's something pretty neat to look for that can really save you money at that particular college. And you'll see that promoted. Excuse me, a little water break here. Study abroad is something we probably all know about, and there are various offerings in that. Virtually every college or university does offer study abroad, but some of them maximize on it. They really have a culture ingrained where almost every student is going to do so. In other ones, it's not the case. I think your average percent of students who will end up studying abroad is somewhere in the teens or 20s for a given institution. And so you do feel like you're kind of the minority there if you choose to do so. But if you go to like a DU or University of San Diego, where they report 70% or so of students study abroad, then you know you're going to be in an environment where it's the culture and everyone wants to do it, and you're not missing out. And so if that's a priority, to be able to have that experience in another country while you're in college, there's definitely a huge degree of difference there. and certain schools that offer it and certain ones that offer it, but not, to the same degree. And generally the bigger universities, you're not going to have as many students study abroad as you are at private universities and colleges. And they oftentimes guarantee the same tuition that you're already paying there, and even can offer a stipend to help cover extra expenses that might come with study abroad. J terms and May terms are another vocabulary that you might hear when you go and visit these schools. And I wish I would have been able to experience this when I was in my undergrad. But a J term is in January, and that's essentially about a month. It's a long semester where you can take a class or you can go do a short-term study abroad experience and not miss a whole semester. And or you don't even have to participate in it. It's optional. You could have just a really long Christmas break. Optional at some schools. Some schools actually do require, I think, certain number of J terms completed. So I really like that. The other one you might come across is a May term, where at the end of the semester, you can choose to do one class or study abroad somewhere, and the weather would be better in May. And so that is a cool thing to look for as you're out there visiting schools, see if they have that. And again, any one of these options could really land home with your student, with your kid, where they're like, oh, that's me. I want to pursue that. And that's why I'm really bringing these things up. Pre-professional programs, I talked about those earlier. You want to ask questions like, where are your students going to medical school? What's the percentage of them that get in? Because the quality and quantity of pre-professional programs varies across the board. A lot of smaller schools promote a very high acceptance rate into medical school, and that's probably because those students, they have less competition in the program. They know their professors better. They get a good recommendation letter. It is a smaller sample size, though, whereas a larger university, they probably have a lot more programming, a lot more options, and bigger pre-med programs. And so that percentage of students who get accepted into medical school, law school, it might be a little lower, but it's a larger number. So that's something to keep in mind when you're kind of getting those reports and getting that data. But good to ask those kinds of questions and to see what all is involved. So contrary to what a lot of people think, you don't major in pre-law, you don't major in pre-med, you major in anything you want to. And as a matter of fact, law schools and medical schools often want students who majored in something totally different, like music, because they see that as bringing variety and strength to their campus when they go there. Especially if you're looking at a big time 20,000, 30,000 student college or I should say university, I would consider an honors program if your student is very high achieving, because it minimizes those numbers, and you have really the benefit of smaller classes. You get a scholarship sometimes with it, and it's a separate application to an honors program, but there's a lot of benefits with that. Sometimes you'll even get your own residence hall where all the students living there are a little more, how do we put it nicely, dedicated to their studies, maybe than some of your other average students. And so honors programs could be great to pursue if you want to make a little bit smaller environment within a large one like a CU Boulder. And then finally, ROTC, something that not all of us always think about, but there's a lot of options there if you want to have another route of trying to save money. And all the branches of the military are willing to offer full tuition scholarships, and they'll even let you do a year where you kind of try it out. There's a term for that. I don't remember what it is, but you can participate in ROTC, but not necessarily sign your life away. So you can go see a recruiter. You can find them very easily, especially at the large campuses. But ROTC could be something, another thing to look at. And places like Texas A&M University have a gigantic presence of ROTC in the military and the tradition there through the Corps of Cadets there, and so that's something distinct with a place like that. But every single school is going to have ROTC to some degree. It depends on the location. A few more to go through here. Thank you for bearing with me. Diversity is something that we might want to prioritize or look into depending on who you are and what your background is. And so those numbers are always posted, but you can ask about that. You can ask about what kind of clubs are dedicated to diversity and so forth. Knowing the male-female ratio is good. We don't always think about that. If we're a female who wants to go to School of Mines where it's like 30% females, and so kind of knowing, and on the contrary, or the opposite, a liberal arts school sometimes has 65% females versus 35-40% males. So knowing what that ratio is before you go, and that also could be a hint to the admissions climate. So if you're applying to a school that's, say, 60% male and you're a female, by nature, you're going to have a likelier chance of getting in. Having worked for an admissions office, that's typically the way it goes. And so that can be a little hint into an advantage with admissions as well. Of course, there are all female women's schools out there, and some very good ones if that's something that your student wants to look into. Looking up the graduation rate and retention rate can be helpful. And these numbers are all over the place. I'm going to show a few websites at the end of the presentation here. One of my favorites is College Navigator, and it gives you lots of numbers. But the graduation rate, you've got your 4-year and you have your 6-year. And if you look at those, it can be alarming sometimes at maybe how low they look. But that's especially if you look at the 4-year grad rate, because again, not all students are able to finish in 4 years. But if you look at the 6-year graduation rate, knowing that the national average is right around 50% to 60%, that can give us an idea of kind of where that school stands that you're looking at. The retention rate is one that I really like to kind of key in on, and that is the percentage of freshmen who decide to return their sophomore year. So it speaks to that first year experience and how good of a job or bad of a job that college does in onboarding their freshman students and what campus life is like. And anything over 80% retention rate is good. Anything over 90 is excellent. Safety is talked about when you visit campuses, the level of safety. You can look up crime data on a school on College Navigator. And they'll usually talk about the safety measures they have in place. And oftentimes schools these days have an app you can get on your phone where you can hit a button and immediately call someone to come get you if you feel threatened. But they talk about that. They talk about the presence of campus police and so forth. But the area, is good to kind of look into. Is the campus distinct and cut off, from its surrounding neighborhood, or is it blended in with the neighborhood, right? Is it an urban campus where you don't even know when you're on campus and off campus, like NYU, or is it gated, which would be the complete opposite? And so those are always good things to kind of look at when you're visiting. And then the percentage of students living on campus, got into this a little bit there. Good to know that as well, especially if you're someone who really wants an on-campus environment and presence and not like a suitcase campus. Good to know how many are living there. And really, if you're looking at a state school, what percentage of freshmen are living on campus? Because you hope to see pretty high numbers of that at least, if you're wanting a good campus environment. But there are state schools that report 30, 40%, 50% of freshmen even not living on campus. So those numbers you're able to find those online. Another one I like to look at if you're looking at an out-of-state school is what percentage of students are actually coming from out of state. Great example, CU has a pretty large percentage of students from California and other states. And so if you're coming from those areas, you might feel right at home. CSU is different. If you're coming from California, CSU might be, all your friends might be going home 45 minutes away for the little weekend there. And you're like, what am I going to do? And so it's good to kind of look at that to see, am I looking at a University of Alabama that reports a lot of students come there from out of state, or am I looking at maybe a place like CSU? And am I going to feel like a fish out of water because I'm from 1,000 miles away? versus right down the road. Things that people don't always think about when they're checking out schools. And then finally, religious affiliation and knowing if you do want to go to a religious school, what does that mean? You know, what kind of classes are you required to take or not? Is there a chapel component? Even if you want to get real down to the nitty gritty, what denomination and so forth. There's a whole world there that you really would want to look into when you're looking at religious schools. But I think there's some great options. So I want to take the time here to speak on values versus prestige. People like myself we feel like we're kind of in a battle sometimes against the notion that we should only look at prestigious schools and that there are only those names that we recognize and heard of are worth our time. And that's really the tip of the iceberg of all the options that are out there. But this little graph here, if you want to call it a graph, it's a little older, but I think it gives a great example. Back in 2019, at least, it took the 10 largest companies and it tells you where their CEOs graduated. And I think if we look at this, we learn pretty quickly we don't have to go to a Harvard to have a fantastic career. You're seeing lots of different schools on here. And so I always tell people where you go is important, but a majority of that pie that is you alone and your abilities and your networking and how hard you work and those kinds of things are 85% of the pie, and the rest of it's where you go and launching you off, in my opinion. Not that it's not important. Of course, it's important where you go, but I think a majority of it is you. A lot of us are aware that there's college rankings out there, like US News. Not a fan of those because a college is such a complex entity to try and rank. There's so much that goes into it. And when you look at what goes into rankings, there's there's incentives for schools to try and make themselves look more selective or to do all the things they need to do to play to the rankings. And selectivity has been one of those factors. And so rather than try and just be a good school, they're trying to make themselves look more prestigious and better for the rankings. And so I do think it skews things. Can it be helpful? Sure, but I wouldn't put all my weight in college rankings. Another stat here, according to Handshake, 80% of Fortune 500 companies recruit from over 200 colleges and universities. So it's a pretty large number. They're not just recruiting at the 20 that we've heard of that we think are super selective and prestigious. They go all over. And so this keeping up, I don't want to say keeping up with the Joneses, but this mentality of gotta have my kid go to a selective school and not look anywhere else. I don't think it's a healthy one. And I think it adds a lot of pressure that's unneeded as well. Do we want to strive high? Absolutely. But if you talk to someone that does what I do, I think we definitely want balance there. And you want to look at values before the prestige and the selectivity of the school. And so things to consider when you're looking at values, the things you should prioritize when you're looking at schools are obviously the area of study. Is it a good fit for you based on what you want to major in? What's the academic environment like? Is there a lot of support there? Does it seem like students are, when you're observing the student culture, are they planning the next party, or are they, having a study group together in the library or out in the quad? The level of academic support varies, since there are schools out there that are known for providing wonderful academic support and accommodations for students with learning differences. There are whole schools that are dedicated towards that. And so just to kind of know that's an option is great. Independent versus community based. You get a vibe sometimes, or if you talk to students who go to schools, these different schools that are out there, you might get an idea of, you feel like you're kind of on your own, or you feel like it's a really competitive environment here, versus, oh, we're all in this together and we want to kind of lift each other up. And so One of my pieces of advice, if you feel willing to do so when you visit a campus, is to try and pull aside a student and just ask them some of these questions. Not the tour guide, because the tour guide's paid usually, but someone who looks like they're available, and just ask them, what's the feel like here? Do you regret coming here, or do you love it? What do you love about it? What do you not like about it? And you might learn some of these things when you're on that campus. Learning about the student culture. Again, you can ask the students these kinds of questions. The tour doesn't always tell you this, but what's the political climate on campus? Is there a lot of school pride or not? There are those who love sports and love the rah-rah environment, and there are those who absolutely hate it and want nothing to do with it. And there are colleges for those kids where it's not necessarily a big deal. What's Greek life like? Does 50% of the student body participate in Greek life and are in frats and sororities, or is it not allowed? Which that's the case in some places. And then what's the level of traditions? I've already mentioned Texas A&M, but they come to mind with a school that has a lot of really wonderful traditions that the alumni participate in as well. Carnegie Mellon is one that is one of my favorites for all their fun little quirky traditions. Look them up if you're ever curious. And so that could be something that can draw you in to a school. The presence of residential life, how much priority is there? How many students live on campus? Are there RAs really involved in giving you that wonderful experience living on campus? What are the facilities and rooms like? Do you want to go to a high point where you could stay in a super fancy condo-like environment if you want to, all the way down to your basic dormitory? So some schools have a whole lot of options there. And then, of course, location is a given one. How far is it from the airport? How far away from home are you willing to be? Do you want to be outside the city or in a rural area? Do you want to be near family? Do you want to be the smack middle of the city? So location is an obvious one. And then the retention rate I mentioned, good number to look at, see how happy students are there on the campus. Want to get into admissions here as we're going to close here soon. Thank you guys. I want to talk a little bit about admissions just because there is a lot of uncertainty out there and anxiety. So I thought I would cover some of the main things to know right now, especially in this day and age going in. And so if you're a student or you have a student or know a student who's about to get into they're on the eve of this, say they're a junior right now, talking deadlines, there are a lot of different terminology that we come across with college deadlines. But the most common ones you're going to see are regular deadline, so regular decision, early action, and rolling. You'll see those quite often. And regular decision is just what it sounds like. That's the old school, the original date that you used to have to apply by in order to get everything looked at. And that is normally after Christmas, January, maybe February, back in the old days. And so most schools still offer that. If you're applying in California at a California State University, they only have one decision. It is the regular decision, and it happens to be December 2nd. So it is a little earlier. The next one you're going to come across a lot is early action. And a lot of schools offer early action. And the most important thing I want to say about it is that it is not early decision, which I'll talk about in a second. A lot of people confuse the two. So early action is simply applying for an earlier deadline that the college offers, normally before Christmas, but you're not signing yourself away. You're not committing to the school, telling them, I will attend if I get in. That's what early decision is, which I'll go into more here. So early action, the advantages are that you hear back from the college earlier. Normally you hear back around Christmas or early January. So you have more time to figure out what you want to do and where you want to go. And it normally conveys to the college or university that you are prioritizing them. You're applying early, you're sending them a message saying, I really dig you guys, and I think I want to, this is where I want to be. And so there's really no disadvantage to early action. If a school offers it, I recommend it. And then rolling is another one that you'll see a lot, and that is beneficial because the school rolls out those decisions. And so when you apply, it doesn't matter as long as it's by an end date that is very friendly, usually way in the future. But if you apply now, they'll get back to you usually within a couple weeks. And so it's pretty friendly in that way. And you'll see rolling, like I said, quite a bit. What you'll see less common, but you may come across, are early decision. And that is normally associated with more selective schools, though that's starting to change. And you're telling the college you're signing something, telling the college if I get admitted, I will attend, I will go. So the benefits are it increases your chances of getting in usually. Um, the disadvantages are pretty obvious. You don't have much uh, freedom there in choosing where you want to go. And so you're really committing to that college early. And then priority deadline is kind of like regular decision, but it's usually you're prioritizing something. The college is saying if you apply by this date, then you can meet the deadline for any of our merit scholarships that we have to offer, for example. If you don't, then you're not going to be counted in that priority. So that's what a priority deadline is. So those five you might come across. And just by example, early action, you'll often see November 1st, November 15th, and December 1st of your senior year is very common for early action deadlines. Talk a little bit about testing. If any of us have kind of followed the news since COVID, there's been a lot of changes going on with our colleges requiring testing. Are they not requiring testing? What's the landscape there? And it is changing. It's a changing landscape. But I'm going to go over some terms that you may hear from your high school counselor or perhaps from a college. The first one is test blind. You're not going to see this very often, but if you apply to any California state school, I keep mentioning California because they're different in how they do things. But if you apply to any California state school, they're going to be test blind, meaning they will not look at your ACT or SAT, even if you tried to submit it. So they're just not going to look at it. So those who are worried about test anxiety, maybe tests are not your strong point, might be good to look at California options for that reason. Test optional is what the vast majority of schools out there are doing right now. Still, I'd say the majority, and that is, do you want to submit your test score? Go ahead. If you don't, go ahead. And that gives a lot of people confusion and anxiety. And I just recommend talking to folks like me or your high school counselor to try and figure that one out. It's good to look at their average reported middle 50% of test scores for students who are admitted, because that gives you a range of those who middle 50% of those who are admitted have between a 26 and a 32 on the ACT, for example. So if you're not in that range, maybe don't submit it if you want a quick answer to that question. Test preferred is not something you'll hear a college say. They will call themselves test optional, but if you look and you dig a little deeper in their numbers, really they're test preferred. And so, not that they report this readily, but you can always ask, what percentage of students did you admit last year who submitted a test score versus didn't submit a test score? And some of these test optional colleges, it's like 75%, 80% of the students they admitted reported a test, and 20% didn't, which means they are really a test preferred school when it comes down to it. And then finally, test required. That number is increasing again. After COVID, we had a moment there where every school was pretty much test optional, but they're all conducting kind of an experiment right now to see how this test optional thing's going. And so nothing is really solidified at this point. Usually schools will tell you we're test optional until a certain date. But required is that list is growing again. And so half the Ivy Leagues are required, roughly. They require tests again. All of the Florida public universities and colleges require, and some of the Georgia ones do, and then a scattering of universities around the country, like Purdue University requires, Auburn, schools like that. So it very, very much is based on where are you looking, and kind of have to do some research to see. And then finally, what else does the school require? Are they going to want recommendation letters or not? I'd say about half the schools out there do, half don't, but good to go ahead and probably try and get one anyway, but which most high school counselors would recommend, just in case you're going to need one. And essays. And so Most students will complete what we call the common application, which a majority, not a majority, but a very large number of schools use. And that has a essay that we call the personal essay built into it that you will do. And then a lot of colleges, though that number is probably decreasing as the years go, require their own essays, and we call those supplemental essays. And so if you are a student who is really busy and tied up in their senior year, and the idea of writing multiple essays just doesn't sound great, it's good to know that and know, I want to apply to this school. Oh, they offer, or they require 3 more essays in addition to the Common App one. Maybe I don't want to apply there. So kind of knowing what you're getting into, and that would be another example there. Just a toolbox, which I hope can be helpful here. There are so many resources out there, but the ones I really like, I have on this list. So when you're talking about websites that do a great job of kind of revealing data and really their take on kind of college profiles and what you're getting with the school, they're up here. College Navigator, I've already mentioned, and that is I believe run by the government, and it gives you all that good data that you're looking for. College Express is another one I really enjoy, and it's put together. The data comes from high school counselors, thousands around the country, and they'll give you their take on a school and kind of give you a snapshot. But they also have hundreds of lists that they've put together, which I think are great. So top colleges for the outdoor enthusiast, top colleges for the underachieving student who still wants to go into engineering. Lots and lots and lots of categories there that you can look at. That's College Express. Niche is another one, and niche.com will give a college a grade based on student feedback, students who are there. And then they have all these different categories. What's the campus life grade? What's the professors, quality of professors grade, and so forth. And so I think it's very helpful. Naviance and Score are both usually built into your high school. So chances are the high school your student goes to uses one of those. And so they have a great college search built into them. Big Future is another one that's run by College Board, and they also offer kind of a college match program that you can type in a bunch of information and get some feedback on good options, good schools to look at. Campus Reel is sort of a little YouTube channel for students and their experience they're having at the college. So you can kind of dig into the life of Sally and learn about her week and her daily life there. And she posts a bunch of videos at said university. So I think that can be really, really helpful as well. And then finally, if you're interested in books, they do have, this one's a little bit more unknown, but I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. Fisk Guide is pretty well known. Ruggs Recommendations is less known. And that is a book that comes out. They have a PDF of it as well. And it's years and years and years of really experts putting together a list of colleges that are known for certain majors. You want to look at what are all the top schools for accounting. Ruggs Recommendations has that broken down into 3 categories: most selective, second most selective, and third most selective. So it's pretty cool. Fisk Guide, a lot of us might remember that really big, thick book back in the day. I think it's still very, very helpful. They do a write-up on a college, so you're getting their expert third opinion on the school. They'll tell you what other schools students are that might be similar that students are applying to in addition to the one that Fisk is talking about. They'll give ratings on different categories, and so I'm a big fan. And finally, one written by a local here in Colorado, Stephen Antonoff, who is basically invented my job. He's like the OG independent educational counselor. He wrote the College Finder, and they're going to have another publication come out soon. And it's sort of like College Express, where it has lots and lots and lots and lots of categories that you can prioritize by. I want to find a college that is both really great in offering accommodations for students with learning differences, but also awesome in STEM majors, for example. So The College Finder is a fantastic book for that. My final thoughts, never too early to start getting out there, and at the very least visiting some campuses. No better way to figure out what you want than by visiting, even if it's a little early. If you have a freshman, sophomore, maybe take them on a campus walk around. I'd say starting spring of sophomore year and on, do an actual official tour. You're planning a vacation, throw a college visit in there as well, see what's around. I think it's so helpful, even if you have no interest in that particular school, it gives you an idea of what that kind of environment might be like. And you have better knowledge than of what you don't want. But I think it can be very helpful to visit as many campuses as possible, meet with your school counselor. If you want extra help because your school counselor is bogged down, hire someone like myself. And my company is Apex College Services, and I have my info right there. Okay, I've been talking a lot, and I think there's just a few of us on here, but are there any questions at all that you guys have about anything I went over?
Well, I'll start just by saying, Chad, wow, what a resource you are. And for those listening and listening on the recording later, it's obvious, I think, but we see a lot of value in Chad and what he's offering to your aspiring college learners. And as an additional resource, I can't recommend him highly enough. I was thinking,
Thank you.
listening to this presentation, gosh, I wish I'd known all this stuff. I was wondering if I would have made a different decision just having heard this myself now. Anyway, thank you so much. We do have a question here from Susan, so let's start with that one.
Okay.
How different were your experiences on campuses versus the schools online, campus tours and videos? What did you learn during the campus visits that you wouldn't have by looking at school websites?
Oh, that's an excellent
I
question.
agree.
Yeah, I would say I think the biggest thing when I mention the word vibes, I think that's a real thing, and you'll hear students say, "Oh man, I thought I loved this particular place, everything I known about it, people I know who went there, what I looked at online, and then once I got there, it just didn't feel right." Now, some of that can be because you have a bad tour guide. So something to keep in mind, I think. But for me, I do a lot of observing. I listen to the tour, but I'm observing students interacting with each other. I look for what's called a heads up or heads down presence on campus. And what that means for me is if I'm walking around on a tour or just getting from one point to the other, are the students between passing periods, do they have their heads up and are they saying hi? And are they look like, they kind of want to whatever, socialize, say hi to whoever they walk by, or they have their heads down in their phone? Did they have their earphones on, that sort of thing? And you really can notice some of those things. And so those are the types of things that I just don't know you can get from just looking at a website. I think a campus reel could help give you an idea of that. But even that is doctored, and you're not going to show those students who might not be happy that day or anything like that. So being there in a normal day and observing what's going on and watching professors interact and so forth, that's one thing I would say. I would also say if you do a visit, you can sometimes schedule a classroom opportunity where they'll put you in a class where you can observe an hour long course. And I think that is awesome. You can have a lunch with a student. So it's that personal connection, which might sound obvious, but it's the personal connection I think that you can really get if you visit versus just looking online.
My question, if there's others, please jump in. You can unmute yourself and ask a question. Or I had a question. Do you have any tips or tricks for grants or getting scholarships for some of these institutions?
Yeah, so a grant is normally going to be based on financial need. That's a whole nother presentation, uh, which we can talk about that. Um, Scholarships, absolutely. So if we're talking merit based scholarships, you can access. Well, it's kind of hard to find. I've got lists that I have access to, and I can share certain websites that will they'll show you the amount on average that a school will award for merit, for example. And so you can kind of get a sense of, okay, this school compared to this school, how friendly are they? How much do they give? And there are schools that are known for being pretty friendly with merit aid. You know, historically, Baylor University comes to mind. It depends on what the school's priorities are. I think we're going to see a lot more merit aid offered because schools are worrying more and more about enrollment as we go forward. So knowing where to apply is the first part of that. I would say get test prep because those test scores, as much as we see test optional kind of being a thing right now, they can still help land you scholarships and test. You can be taught and prepped on these tests to do the best job you can and get a better score. There are also websites out there like fastweb.com is one of them, where they'll show you listings, a directory of thousands and thousands of merit scholarships. And I would recommend that you start anytime you're researching scholarships, you start local and you try to find ones that are offered in the area. One that always comes to mind is the Highlands Ranch Community Association scholarship. They give out a handful of those every year, about 2,500, maybe 3,000 per student. And it's for those students who are really involved in their community and so forth. So knowing what some of those local ones are, even checking with the local library can be helpful. But there are definitely websites that can tell you those things. And when you visit and when you get on the websites, they will usually list what they offer. And so if you're early enough in high school and you can kind of see, okay, they offer a $26,000 scholarship if I have a 3.8 GPA and or a 1350 SAT, I'm going to strive for that. So if you know early, that's very helpful. If you're already kind of getting, in your junior year now, it's a little different, but you can find those schools to apply to that are friendlier when it comes to merit scholarships.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
If there's no other questions, yeah, I just echo the thoughts of everyone I think here. But Chad, thanks for your time. We really appreciate it. You've got contact information if you'd like to reach out to him further. You're a huge resource, and we hope you guys all have a great night. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, guys.